Like and subscribe right now, or this will be in your bed tonight. You say I'm a bad employee. Would be a bad thing to disappoint you, right? This story happened a long time ago, but has always kept a special place in my heart, just because of the pure satisfaction I had from it all. It's a pretty long story, because of the background, but I think it might be relevant to understand why I acted like I did. The background. When I was just out of my first year of college, during the summer I was working at a local fast food. Almost everyone that was working there was getting along with everyone else, and the overall atmosphere was almost always positive and funny. Keyword here being almost. That almost was named Nancy. Nancy was older woman working with us, and about in her 40ish at the time, likely more. Usually dealing with a workplace bully alone is pretty annoying, but this one felt she was better than everyone, and unsociable because the manager running the restaurant was actually her sister. Not only was she able to bully and harass everyone how she pleased, no escalation would ever have any repercussion, because it was either her or her sister doing the schedules. She would usually never be schedules for any weekend, and would never finish a shift later than 2 o'clock to 3 p.m. If someone ever dared to talk back to her, or to give her attitude, because of her snarky comments or various behaviors, she would inevitably set you to work on the weekend for both Friday night, Saturday night, essentially knowing you were stuck at work until 11:30 to 12 o'clock. Meanwhile all your friends were already partying and having fun. She was also super lazy at that place. We had a lot of prep to do. The onion rings for example were all handmade. They didn't came prepared in boxes or anything. We were making them from scratch with flour, milk and everything. Then store them into a long storage boxes in the fridge, and the whole process would take a good hour depending of how much we needed to make, sometimes more, usually to survive a day of work. You would need about 4 boxes, and on big days like Saturdays you could go up to 6 to 8 boxes, but Nancy was somehow able to finish 4 boxes in about 20 to 30 minutes. The poor quality came with it, and if you were to point, her batches looked like half chewed onions rings. You know you were in for the weekend night shifts or a night shift plus a morning shift the very next day. Another thing that was highly frustrating was her break habits. If you were both in the kitchen and a dozen of people would come in at once, she would rush out the back and go for a smoke break, leaving you alone to handle all that by yourself until all the orders would be done, then would come back in and complain of how slow you were to handle said orders. But if you were on your break or lunch break and that 2 to 3 people came in, she would actually pull you from your break and have you work just to do a side of fries or something. Lastly, she was abusive, not just verbally but also physically. She would purposely work in a way that could potentially hurt you and blame you if you would ever get hurt by her actions. For example, at one point I was picking up fries from the fries container, and then during that time the timer on one of the fryer rang to let us know the next batch of fries were ready. She took the fry basket and just dumped everything on my arms while I was still finishing the fry order I had in my hands. Obviously I had burns on my hands and arms by the fries and oil. I actually ended up having scars on my arm from that for about 5 to 7 years before they actually faded and disappeared. What was her reaction to that? Hurry, you're being too slow. She almost stabbed a guy with a knife at one point because she was walking while holding the knife in a, let's say, less than safe manner, with the tip of the knife pointing straight forward at just about belly button level. Most normal human being would think it would be dangerous to walk this way, but Nancy simply didn't care, and one day bumped into someone. Her comment was something along the lines of, look where you're going, and these kind of things wouldn't happen. Luckily the guy only had a small cut on his arm, but her favorite things to do with knives was to just let them loose in the sink full of water. Knives and any sharp objects should never be dropped in the sink with other items to clean, because you can see them as you're searching in the water for the next thing to clean. So the chance of cutting yourself whenever she prepared the dishes to be cleaned were pretty high if you weren't super careful, which added to that she would always run as boiling hot. She also had a weird thing of picking on me, particularly way more than most other people. Never really understood why. Maybe because she never seemed to be able to fully get me mad and lose it or something. I guess it's a weird thing some bullies have about picking on the patient person to see how far they can go before they blow up, and then she would report them for bad behavior and get them fired. At one point there was a new guy who came in and for some reason she shifted all her attention from me onto the guy for 2 weeks. During that time she made his life like hell at work anytime they were on the same shift. Although those were the best 2 weeks I had at work in a very long time, I always felt really bad for the guy because I knew what he had to go through. Right after he had quit, she was back to me as her main target. Fast forward another month and here we are in the main scenario. Friday. We had been super busy, way more than usual, and I had to keep one extra person with me in the kitchen, Nathan. I wasn't technically a team leader / supervisor for the kitchen, but I had all the same authority, which included being able to make the call if we required staff to come in, or a main extra hours in case of more customers than usual. Same thing would go for under volume. If the amount of customer was much lower than usual, someone wanted to go home, I actually could make the call and send someone home early if they didn't mind. Anyway, overall that was a rough night for everyone. We closed the restaurant and the cashier finished her side and we all went home after a really long night of work. Now on to the big day. Saturday. I come in as usual around 12:50 for my 1 PM shift, and then first thing I get is an angry Nancy up my face going on about how I dared to keep one extra person last night since it wasn't that busy, and that no overstock was prepared, and that nothing was ready for morning when she came in and there was only like 12 order in the entire night. Realistically it was more like 96 that, but sure Nancy. Somehow that one really got to me, but I still kept my composure. But inside I actually got boiling. I went around the kitchen to say hello to everyone like I always did, and then up front to say hi to the cashiers, and then I see my friend Kristen crying. Kristen was the cashier that closed the night before, while me and Nathan handled the kitchen. She was handling the front. She explained to me what just happened. Before talking to me, Nancy had just told her that her cash didn't balanced, and that she was a thief and that all the money difference will be taken off her paycheck, and that she was in big trouble because she would be reported to the manager for her behavior and get fired. I knew Kristen well as she was one of my good friends and I knew this wasn't her, but this overall situation really made me snap. I was done being patient. Usually we would all support each other whenever Nancy would throw her fit, but seeing one of my friend in such a state was too much. Usually I'm a pretty composed guy most of the time and I could take abuse and still remain calm, but I had one rule. Do not ever mess with my close friends, and this is where things gets a bit out of hand sometimes, because I tend to overreact, especially when I want to send a message. I tell her that everything will be okay, and that I had an idea. I gathered all the cashiers and the cooks. Nancy had already left by that time, and I explained my plan. I decided that night was my last night, but since I was still technically team leader, sort of, they should still listen to me. After I told them what I had in mind, they all gladly obliged on all my demands. I could tell the kitchen staff how much food to prepare, or in this case how much not to prepare. Nancy had just berated me, said how much of a bad employee I was, and boy was I about to prove her right. The plan. I told all the staff of the kitchen to only prep the bare minimum to survive, so that no overstock would be left for the next day at the exception of the breakfast. Since Nancy did most of the breakfasts, I wanted her to have plenty of overstock for her next shift on the next day, because she hated to do prep and would never prep for the evening shift. If she worked mornings, at the end of the night it was almost beautiful. Everything ranging from onion rings were completely out, diced onions, sliced onion, tomatoes, lettuce, fries were not unpacked, chicken was not prepared for the next day, condiment containers were empty, and no new batch were out. Even burger breads were almost completely out, but we actually refilled those for the next morning. Some of those were used for breakfast and I wanted them to have more than enough for breakfasts. Now, since I was also such a bad employee for keeping people for periods when it's not busy, I told both Nathan and Matt that they could stay with me until closing if they wanted, unless they had anything better planned. Both of them said yes, and that for some reason they didn't had anything planned anymore that night. To give you an idea of how much stock is missing in the cooler, normally you can barely fit 2 people tightly squeeze in there. In this case, however, you could walk in there, arms wide open, and turn around. Everything went as normal for the remainder of the night, which funny enough was super quiet, maybe like 3 to 4 orders. When everything was done and time to go home, I took my apron and work clothing, folded them and placed that in my unlocked mini locker with my cap on top, with a note I intentionally sticking out. Sunday. The next day I had decided to go see the girlfriend I had at the time and we went around town and relaxing. But when it was around 12:55 I told her I had a call to make. Thing is, I was normally scheduled to work that day from 1 PM till closing. But I knew that day Nancy was supposed to work with me until 3 PM and I knew damn well she would never do any prep knowing I would be coming in that day and that she was likely anticipating all the work I would had been forced to do while having to juggle doing prep and orders while she'd go out smoking. I call the restaurant and Gwen picks up, another older woman who worked there, but that one was usually really sweet with everyone but who worked most morning with Nancy, and on that day, but was finishing at 1h. The call went along like this. Me, hey Gwen, how you doing? Gwen, doing pretty good, but where are you? Usually you're already here by this time. I was starting to get worried something might have happened to you. Me, oh no, no worries Gwen, I'm all fine, but hey listen. I wanted to let you know I won't be coming in for work today. Gwen, oh, what do you mean? What's going on? Me, I'm quitting. Gwen, what? You can't do that 5 minutes before your shift. There's no prep of anything. Why would you ever do something like this? Me, just ask Nancy. She knows why. Also, tell her to look in my locker because I left her a note in for her in there. Sorry, I got to go now. Bye. I then hung up and continued my day as nothing happened and enjoyed my Sunday afternoon. The fallout. The people working there gave me some of the nice juicy details about what happened. Apparently Gwen confronted Nancy about this and immediately called the owner directly informing her of the situation that just happened. Nancy's sister's boss, Stacy, the owner, got there in less than 20 minutes after that. I got told I had missed the spectacle of the century. Apparently, Stacy had said that Nancy will be covering my shift and also do all the prep associated with it until close, and that the prep had to be finished before she could leave, and that they would talk again about this very soon. This changed Nancy's shift from a 7 AM to 3 PM into a 7 AM to 10 PM shift, effectively changing this into a 15-hour day of work plus closing time. Also, Stacy had ordered that smoke break were completely out of question at this point. Apparently, Nancy went pale after hearing all this, and as soon as Stacy left she went into the walk-in freezer to cry for a good 5 minutes before coming out and looking even worse than before because of the cold. Someone had to be called to come in and work and assist for the remainder of the day as well. But essentially, there was a lot of angry customers because the restaurant was out of nearly everything. There was a ton of complaint that day which just seemed to aggravate the whole situation even further. The best part of all this is that Nancy's own daughter also worked at the restaurant and was able to see her own mom pretty much working like a slave all day. Seeing everything crash on her like that so bad was something she actually liked it, since her daughter was actually nothing like her mom and also had a hard time dealing with her and was loving that she could finally laugh at her expense in this. Over the course of the next 3 days, Stacy called in all the staff in the office to hear about what else had happened and to have a talk with her. Nancy and Nancy's sister were the last two called in together, and at the end of that Nancy was actually fired for workplace bullying. But it didn't quite ended there. I had some friend in a town about an hour away that owed me some favors. I provided him Nancy's phone number, name, address, and car information and to have fun. Even years later he had always refused to tell me all that happened. Event if I wasn't in the front row seat at any time during the backlash on Nancy. Still enjoyed every bit of story people told me. From that point on for a good while she had issues finding work since it's a small town, so words get by really fast on anything. Best part is, when it came for applying for other jobs, I actually went back to the restaurant and asked Stacy if she wanted to be one of my references, and she said yes, even though my little stunt cost the company a fair amount of money. She said she actually enjoyed the overall boldness of it all. Every job I had after that, I was told that Stacy was the one of the best references I had, and that she only said positive things. Sorry if the story was a little long, and I hope you enjoyed it, because I sure did. 10/10ths would do it again. Also, for the note I had left in my locker, what I had left Nancy was simply the drawing of a happy face and have a good day written above it. TL. Doctor, I got bullied at work by a supervisor. I quit my job, purposely cause overtime on staff, caused the restaurant to lose business, made a bunch of customers angry, got a workplace bully fired by her sister's boss, and provided said workplace bully personal information to questionable people, just because I wanted to pee. $sign her off. Thank you all for watching. Please make sure you like and subscribe for more videos. The funniest comment on this video will appear in the next video. Bye.